Hello, can everyone hear me? Excellent. Hello, well, thank you very much for coming and spending time to listen and to see. So, all right. So let's see. Let me go to the sign all the way on the left with the old-fashioned picture of Sherlock Holmes on it, or the actor playing Sherlock Holmes. So, ever since graduate school, I've had an interest in astrobiology. Astrobiology basically being the search, largely interested in the search for life beyond Earth. There's other aspects to it, the spread or hypothetical spread of life beyond Earth, etc. But basically, it's largely looking for aliens. So my particular interest is more in the search for microbial life beyond Earth, so bacteria or microscopic life beyond Earth. I have a background in that from graduate school, and I think even though it may not seem too dramatic, if it's found, it has enormous implications in science and biology, and just our understanding of life in the universe. Uh, so I'm going to go on the left, or so you want to call it. Um, if anybody has any questions, or if I'm being unclear about anything, please just send it in text or in chat, that is, and I'll try to respond to it during the presentation, or in yeah. So basically, I've had this interest, and when I tried to explore the interest in astrobiology and the search for microbial life beyond Earth, there's not a lot sort of in between, very basic stuff with no real content, just sort of high level blurbs. And then on the other side of things, very serious sort of material for scientists and highly specialized, knowledgeable folks. Seems to me that there's a lot in between. So I had an idea of that addressed people with a scientific, but not a deep background in the particular areas of chemistry or biology or astrobiology that this stuff is in. So as for my own background, I want to make it clear I have this graduate background in microbiology and environmental science, and I've done graduate research on, they're called extremophile bacteria, so bacteria which thrive in really unusual extreme conditions on Earth. That's really relevant for the search for microbial life beyond Earth because we have to look to other planets and moons and such where life might exist in conditions that are not all that similar to Earth. Anyway, so but I'm not. I don't work for NASA. I'm not a biologist by profession. I'm a patent lawyer by profession. I just have this background and this interest, and that's about it. So, and to that end, I have this exhibit in Second Life. There's a landmark on the right. It's really just a warehouse in New Babbage, the area of Second Life called New Babbage, with signs kind of like this, with images and text. There's also a website that the website is given also on the sign to the right, Fosdick's Astrobiology, that I put together sort of as a personal library, and maybe in time can expand it. So let's see. So going back to the sign, what we don't know. I mean, we know there's life on one planet in the universe. We don't know if there's life anywhere else yet. But I think that it's pretty likely that sometime in the next, I don't know, 15 years or so, we'll find life. I think it'll be most likely on or in a moon in the solar system. And if that life is really different than life on Earth, I think it will go a very long way to suggesting that there's life spread throughout the universe. I also think that if there's microbial life different from life on Earth anywhere, it suggests that in other places, probably, almost certainly, there's intelligent life. And most likely, if there's any, there's tons of it because the universe is huge. And where there's two, I think there's bound to be many, many more. When there's one, it's hard to say for sure. So that brings me to the next point, which is I think we're at a sort of unique time in human history. We know of only one place where life exists, but if we find a second place where life exists, and it seems to be independent from life on Earth, not just maybe something that was brought there by a mission or something. But if we find it in two places in the universe, even if it's another moon on Earth, I think that means two things. One, it means that life is probably abundant, even if widely spread out throughout the universe. And second, I think if you investigate the details of what you can tell about life just by investigating a single cell of a microorganism, it's enormous. Every cell in a person's body or in a microorganism's body, even a unicellular creature's body, the cell is just filled. It's a library of biological machinery and information. If we find any other life different from life on Earth, we'll know infinitely more because we'll have two things that are fundamentally different, and we could tell so much. How are the biochemical systems similar or different? The chemistry, the mechanics of the cell membrane, all of that stuff, the DNA. With two, we'll have sort of a line, as opposed to a point, and we could tell so much about what might be in between. It'll tell us so much about what other life may be out there and what it might be like, where we might find it. And then the hunt sort of continues. We find other life, and we can start having more information where to look potentially for intelligent life, or where to look for signals that might be reaching us, such as radio signals from intelligent life. I think it can really sort of escalate. And I think it's likely to happen in our lifetimes. So I think it's exciting. Let's see. So I figure I'll spend another 5 or so minutes on this sign, and then I'm going to go. I've got about 20 sort of articles that are a part of the exhibit. Each one has generally one or sometimes two images. I'm going to stick to mainly discussing the images and go through that for like the second half of the hour to go through the sort of library of astrobiology slides that I put together. The text is on the website, and in the exhibit, I'll mostly focus on the slides, which are part of each article here. So anyway, going back to the sign on the left, E says detective work, the treasure hunt. I look at this as an enormously important treasure hunt. Riverfish fossil background. I don't know about that. It sounds fun. I was just looking at the chat. Anyway, I've kind of hit on this already, but I think this is sort of like detective work. You keep narrowing and narrowing where you look until you start finding evidence, and then that evidence can help you further narrow where you look until hopefully eventually you hit pay dirt. You find life. You may find satellite imagery that suggests there could be chemistry that's favorable to life on a moon in the solar system, a moon of Jupiter or of Saturn, for example, such as Europa or Enceladus. And then maybe you narrow down. You say, okay, let's get more information on that. Hopefully, eventually, maybe you can land a lander on the moon and maybe even get a sample from a plume of these sort of cryovolcanoes that spew chemicals up from these moons. Anyway, I look at it as a treasure hunt, and I think people are getting close. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be true. Perfect. A Sherlock Holmes quote. And I never thought of it in this context. I like it. Right. So it's kind of interesting. You could say, I mean, to me, it is arguably impossible that life doesn't exist elsewhere, or at least it seems fantastically unlikely. So however improbable it may seem that there's this, fundamentally different life out there, I think it's certainly true, because the opposite is almost certainly false, which is weak in the likely. That's it. It's pretty much along the lines of what I'm articulating right now. So I mean, unless you hold kind of a something other than a purely scientific based view, which is fine, but unless you hold that, it's very difficult to think that there's not life out there elsewhere in the universe. I also think we're going to find it soon. It doesn't seem to me that it's that unlikely that it's findable in the next decade or two. Anyway, I'm going on too much. So going back to the sign, going back to F. So how do we start this hunt? Well, we have only this one data point. We don't have several. So we have to use what we know about known life and try to go from there to make guesses about where we might look for life outside of Earth. Let me read the chat here. You mentioned getting samples. Maybe you're about to talk about how we avoid contaminating those samples with microbes from Earth. Eclipse, that's a good point. I've read a little bit about that. I guess I can't really talk about it. I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something we need to be concerned about, and something we need to think about. But it's sort of above my pay grade. I've never gotten so deep into it to really think about that too much. But that's a big issue. I understand that it's people at NASA and all are really working to make sure that when we do take samples, et cetera, that we can avoid that issue. I mean, ultimately, if you do find, living cells that are different from Earth-based life, it seems to me they'll be distinguishable. But there's a lot in between. It could get complicated. Anyway, it's a good point. Anyway, going on. So most people follow these assumptions when they start to try to narrow down the search for life. And one is, I guess I'll say this one, and then I'll get right back to the. I'll go to the chat right now. Let me see. I think even if life took hold from our contamination, it would still demonstrate something. I mean, that's true too. And it's sort of another issue. But it's an interesting point. Those are all interesting points. For me, I get really excited at the thought of finding actual cellular life that is fundamentally different, evolved separately from life on Earth. I just that for me that's exciting. Anyway, moving on. So suppositions to narrow the hunt. There's a couple things about life that seem to be very fundamental to life on Earth, that life on Earth just can't do without. One is water, liquid water, H2O. No other kind of liquid will do, and it's got to be liquid. It can't be ice. It can't be vapor. Life is fundamentally swimming around in water. Even we are. Our cells are composed mostly of water. All the chemical reactions that happen for life happen in water. There's all kinds of reasons for that, but water seems to be pretty unique, or potentially just unique in terms of supporting life, at least Earth-based life. So that's one thing that we do. We look for water. When I say we, I mean not so much we, but people who really investigate this look for places in the universe, and more locally, places in the solar system where there might be liquid water. So the Andromeda Stratum, that'd be interesting, fun, potentially deadly, right? but interesting. Anyway, I keep jumping to the chat, which is kind of fun. So sorry if it's confusing. So anyway, in terms of water, where you find liquid water, you may find life. It's not common in the universe generally, liquid water, at least from what we know. It's certainly not. It's not common in the area of our sort of local, I guess you would say, stellar neighborhood that we're in. But it is out there, and it's much more out there than people used to think, such as under the surface of typically ice in moons in the solar system. There's liquid water almost for certain, and lots of it. You need a couple things for liquid water. You need pressure. That helps keep the water liquid. You can't just have heat. You have to have pressure. It gets into the physics. So how do you get that pressure? Well, it could be gravity, or it could be a layer of ice on top of a subsurface ocean, that kind of thing. The other thing that you need is heat, but it doesn't have to be heat from the sun. I mean, because if the temperature's too low, the water will be ice. And most of the ice that we find, I think, in the universe tends to be ice because there's not that much heat out there around water. But the sun is not the only way to have heat. You can also have friction underneath the surface of planets, typically created by gravity differentials due to a planet's orbit being further and closer from what it's circling around, if it's a moon, from the planet. So you can have heat and you can have pressure, and not just on planets, also on moons. Anyway, so those are things that you look for. Let's see. Let me take a look at the chat. You'll be talking about potentially having liquid water on exoplanets warmer than 0 degrees Celsius and pressure above 7 millibars. I don't remember about the specific pressure, but yeah, basically, exoplanets are fascinating. The thing about exoplanets, these exoplanets being planets outside the solar system, so not planets in the sun system, but planets around other stars. The trouble with searching for life in exoplanets, in my opinion, at least for the time being, is that they're just really, really far away. We're nowhere near getting to the point where we can get a probe or a satellite in the neighborhood of an exoplanet. So it's going to be difficult to confirm whether there could be life. There may very well be life on exoplanets, but within the solar system, it doesn't seem likely that there's life on other planets in the solar system. But in my opinion, it does seem at least very possible that there's life in or on moons in the solar system. if I feel like that should be a focus in the near term because it's just closer and we can get more information about it. We have satellite information. We can even potentially land probes on some of these moons like Europa. So anyway, moving on. Maybe I'm taking too long on this, but what the heck. Then the other thing about life that is fundamental to life on Earth and absolutely necessary for life as it exists on Earth is carbon. The chemical element carbon. It's not generally in its independent form, but in compounds. Carbon and its compounds are fundamental to the chemistry of life on Earth. Carbon is unique in providing a tremendous amount of variation in structure and in molecules, and that variation and variability, diversity, is important and necessary for the structures that are necessary to life on Earth. So another assumption that people make is maybe, some say probably, life beyond Earth will have to be based on carbon as well. It doesn't have to be. It could be silicon. It could be other chemical elements, but carbon seems most likely. And so therefore people look to where carbon is to find life on Earth. The thing is, carbon is abundant in the universe, whereas liquid water is not. So liquid water tends to be more the focus in terms of narrowing the hunt. And then going on to item G on the slide on the left, and this is what I've been talking about already. Relatively recently, in the last, I don't know how many years, scientists have made observations that make it almost certain that enormous bodies of water, you could call them oceans, exist technically under the surface of, generally, ice layers of moons in the solar system, including Europa, Enceladus, or at least including Europa, and I think it's Enceladus too, and others. In any event, it could be that there's life in there. Where there's water, common sense and science tells us, where there's, not just transient water like maybe on Mars, but bodies of water that exist and stay for long periods of time, you may find life. I believe that if we were able to get a probe into the subsurface oceans of Europa, we might very well find life. And that may happen, but it'll be expensive. We want to find a carbon copy of human on the moon. Well, we're not going to find. So I don't think there's a reasonable possibility of independent life. There could be, life on the moon that might have survived for a while after a probe from Earth. I don't think it's likely that there's independent life on the moon. Yeah, so I don't. I think we're much better off, or on Mars for that matter, not present-day Mars. I personally think the science suggests to look elsewhere, but we can get all kinds of clues about life from the moon. But anyway, so that's it for the sign on the left, and it's 20 minutes into my hour. So I appreciate you listening to all that. With that, I want to get, into my website and my exhibit, which is roughly 20 or so articles. The articles have a lot of text and some images. I'm not going to get into the text. If you're very interested, please go ahead and read either the website or at the exhibit. But I'd like to focus mainly on the images and talk about the articles. The images are more interesting, and it's too much to go into text during a presentation like this. So if you want to follow along on the website, you can do so. There's on the home page of the website, there is a table of contents. That's essentially what you see on the right here, the multicolored titles there. And each one will link to an article. And the images that I'm going to show you are from each of those articles. So if anybody has questions or wants to stop me along the way, or anything, constructive criticism, please do. So I thought I'd go through this. So the way I have this set up, if you want to look at the table of contents to the right, I have most of my exhibit or website is devoted to aspects of life generally, because you have to understand life generally to understand how to look for it elsewhere, and to specific topics relevant to the search for life on moons in the solar system. And then, so that's A basically in blue. And then B and C, I talk a bit about the search for intelligent life beyond Earth, and in terms of radio SETI, radio search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and also the search for life in other solar systems. This gets into the exoplanets topic that was brought up in the local chat. So back into that now. If you want to follow along, I'll show you where each of these images falls in this outline. But basically, I'm starting from astrobiology generally is the first one. I don't have an image that's worthwhile to show you there, but in the actually I kind of do. So let me do that. I'll start from square one. So astrobiology generally, I'm going to throw another image up here. This is the image that I chose for that. I just sort of define astrobiology. I've already talked about that. This is the Mars rover. And I put it up just because I think it's cool. Human ingenuity, we can get these machines to other planets, to moons in the solar system, potentially beyond, and it's wild what we can find and sample. So moving on, so then the next topic on the right is the search for microbial life beyond Earth. So you're looking specifically for bacteria-like cells on bodies beyond Earth, such as in the solar system. So there, my exhibit, the first thing it goes into is the development of early life on Earth. So, and that is a sort of 1A, 1A2 in the table of contents. I'm not going to go into that in detail, although I think it's fascinating, or I wouldn't have wrote about it. But I do want to show an image related to it, since I think it's interesting and kind of makes the overall point well. So let me pull up that image. So that's 1A, 1A2. Okay, so I'm just waiting for this image to res in. This is in connection with the article entitled "The Development of Early Life on Earth." Let's see now. So what's interesting here is this is a bloom. The green section in the center here, this is taken from afar, the surface of the Earth, the Pacific Ocean. And here you can see this bloom, this greenish area is a bloom of cyanobacteria. These are microscopic organisms, but there are so many and such a density that you can actually see from orbit around the Earth this bloom of what are called cyanobacteria. But these are also very interesting bacteria. They were bacteria that were prevalent, it's believed, on early Earth. And they photosynthesize. They actually create oxygen. Not just plants, but early in life's existence, bacteria generated the oxygen that is now prevalent in, or at least constitutes a large part of the Earth's atmosphere. So that's that. So the next thing I'm going to go into is on the slide on the right, getting down further. There's 1A. 2A, it says, I guess I won't go by the numbers and letters, it gets a little cumbersome, but in red there's the Yuri Miller experiment. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's pretty interesting. It's older now, but still really relevant to the search for life beyond Earth. So I'm going to put up a slide on it. 1A, 2A. Hold on one second. I don't understand why sometimes my textures are not popping onto the display. I don't get it. Let's see. Go to University of Chicago. That is where the Yuri Miller work was done. Oh, that's interesting. A day, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder, I'm having a little trouble trying to drag and drop my textures, some of them, onto the display. Does anybody know? I hate to ask, but does anybody know? Oh, yeah. Does anybody know why you can't sometimes drop textures? I just don't get it. I may have to go to a different texture. I haven't had this problem before, so I wasn't really expecting it. This time it seems like it worked. Yeah, they are copyable, Taliver. I don't know. It's funny. I went and I tried it again, and it worked. So I don't know what the heck happened, but this time it worked. It seems inconsistent, which makes it hard to diagnose. Also, I'm not so good at some of this building stuff. But anyway, so this is a picture. Julia Child makes primordial soup video. That's interesting. The text chat says Julia Child makes a primordial soup video. I like it. So this here, I won't go into detail, but the Ouray Miller apparatus was basically this. Oh, thank you, Violet. Yeah, it is ornery. So Basically, this apparatus is pretty simple. And what it showed is that if you just create sort of a primordial soup, some basic chemical compounds, and keep jolting it with electricity, more or less, after a while, you'll wind up with amino acids, which are pretty complex building blocks of protein. And it goes a long way to suggesting that life could have developed on early Earth just from a bunch of common chemical compounds and, say, lightning, jolts of energy hitting it. So I think you need to drag to a receptive spot. Some textures are finicky that way. That's well said, and I definitely am going to try that. Maybe I just need to kind of fiddle with where I'm dropping it to. That could be it. Thank you, Baragon. So anyway, so that's the Yuri Miller experiment. I have one more sign on that I think it might be worth showing. I put this together myself, and I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is important because if you can establish that it seems reasonably likely that life could have evolved, complex life could have evolved from nothing but a bunch of common chemicals and sort of random mindless energy inputs, then that goes a long way to saying that maybe life could have evolved elsewhere in the universe where these conditions were somewhat similar. So the Ouray Miller apparatus, up here I made a little diagram. So this is what it was sort of about here. You have water vapor. This is what the chemical apparatus, the experimental apparatus used. Water vapor, simple gases like methane, ammonia, hydrogen, common throughout our area of the universe, and then repeated application of electrical sparks, just shocks. And then what do you do to get these amino acids to form? You just give it time. You just let it keep happening, the passage of time. And then what do you get? You get simple organic compounds out of this. It's pretty wild. And that's it. Let's see. Ironically enough, it's a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics. Interesting stuff. It's interesting how these laws of physics, which can reduce to very simple laws, can produce ultimately, under natural conditions, without any apparent design, can produce these complex functional cellular organelles and cells themselves and life. But that's, of course, the larger thing. The gases come from, I'm reading the text chat again, those gases come from volcanoes and were most likely in the Precambrian atmosphere. Sounds right to me. It sounds like you know more than me, but I like it. It seems to me that it fuels the idea that life is out there elsewhere, probably. Anyway, okay. I'm going to move on. So going back to the slides on the right, maybe I'll be a little selective here. So I talk about the key requirements of known life, and one of them is liquid water. I guess I'll show the image associated with that. So liquid water. Let me find that. That's 1A3. 1A3, page 2. Yeah, I'm reading about these energy sources. It's sort of beyond my pay grade, but it's all interesting stuff. So this is just simply a model of a water molecule. But what's interesting about it is it's basic chemistry. But water, in addition to being liquid in a wide range of temperatures and pressures, which you need it to be liquid, also has this polarity associated with it, which is indicated in red. And without getting into detail, the way water interacts with chemicals, and it allows it to be much better involved and facilitate chemical reactions, which makes it potentially unique in supporting life. I probably didn't say that as well as a good chemistry person would, but that's the gist. This polar nature of the water molecule makes it unique. I don't know if Eclipse meant exactly to me, but I hope so, because I think that's the basic gist of it. So anyway, so going on, what do I have past that? So then I talk about, I don't know if I should go into this slide, basic liquid phase water physics for astrobiology. It's maybe a little heavy, but it took me forever to make the slide diagram, so I'm going to throw it up just for the heck of it for at least a minute. Because water is so fundamental to, you're right, Eclipse, laying on us. All right. So I had a lot of fun doing this slide. So it's beyond just water. It's pretty fundamental stuff, I think, for the search for life beyond Earth. So I won't go into the detail of this, but basically, if you look at the top, you've got Earth, you've got the sun, and I represent heat from the sun. That's where you get the heat to keep the water on Earth liquid. And then, yeah, Europa. So, Eureka, maybe, on Europa. Anyway, so you have heat coming down on the Earth from the sun, and then you have pressure on the surface. Where does the pressure come from that keeps the liquid on the Earth's surface, the oceans, liquid? The water liquid. The pressure comes primarily from simply the gravity of the Earth. It's big. It has a lot of gravity. And I mean, also from the atmosphere. I actually kind of misspoke. It's really the gravity and the atmosphere pushing down, the air pulled down from the gravity pushing down on the water. So you have liquid water on Earth. But then if you look below, yeah, gravity pulling down on the atmosphere. There you go. So anyway, then below, if you look at Jupiter and Europa. So Jupiter's a planet like Earth. Not many people think there's life on Jupiter. Who knows? But it's mostly gaseous, I think, or all gaseous. In any event, there's heat transferred from Jupiter to Europa. Europa is a moon of Jupiter, just like the moon is a moon of the Earth. Europa is a moon of Jupiter, but it's heated by what are called tidal forces. This basically results, as I understand it, from the variations in the orbit of Europa around Jupiter. That produces different gravitational pull from the monstrous pull of gravity on Jupiter, which basically tugs at the material that constitutes Europa. That creates friction, and that creates heat. And then in addition, while you don't have a lot of gravity, you do have a subsurface ocean because the pressure is provided by ice on top of Europa over the water. The ice provides pressure, and then you have the heat from the, maybe, well, you do, it's believed, have liquid water. And maybe there's life under there, but we'd have to drill through, I think, a couple of miles of ice to get to it. It's tidal forces due to the fall. I'm reading the chat. It's tidal forces due to the fall off of gravity with distance. Right. Sounds right to me. Let's see. The companion from Star Trek Terms of Service lives on, I don't know what that means exactly, lives on Jupiter. I'll bet it's clever, but I don't understand it. Anyway, so I maybe spent too much time on that, but it's fundamental to why I think, and why many people think there could be Earth. Zephram Cochrane. Yeah, I remember that guy, but it's been a long time. Anyway, I was reading the local chat again. Why life on Earth may well exist on moons in the solar system. Because you can have liquid water because of tidal forces from gravity and ice layers on the surface of the moons, which cover and provide pressure to keep the liquid underneath water. Down below, I won't go into this diagram too much, but the basic gist of this is, if you see on the right, it says no liquid water below this pressure at any temperature. You got to have pressure to have water. And then you could see the range on Mars part talks about where there's under what conditions there could be liquid water on Mars. It's transient at best. There's only a very narrow range of possibilities where you can get liquid water on Mars, because there's not much pressure on Mars, etc. But on Earth, there's a large range, and the green shows that the green circle, excuse me, shows that range. So I'll move on. That was sort of my pet slide, but I find it interesting. So then, the next thing I've got is this light blue slide saying the key requirements for known life, carbon. So I'm moving on from water and talking about one of the key requirements for life, which is believed to be known life, which is believed to be carbon. So now I'm going to go to, let's see, 1A4. I'm going to throw up a slide. And I'm going to try to be gentle with it, as I think it was Paragon suggested, which worked. So so this is a neat image. I wish I created it myself. I did not. But it is not copyrighted. I'm careful about copyright. But it shows these different chemical structures that carbon can make. So carbon is carbon copyright. So carbon is so unique because it not only forms a great variety of chemical structures with other chemicals, even just with itself, it can form an enormous variety of structures with different chemical properties. So these are, I think, isotopes of carbon. So these are chemical structures of just carbon bonded with carbon in different variations. So basically, this diversity of structure that carbon enables allows the various different chemical structures that are necessary for the complex systems of life to happen. And that's why life, as we know it, needs carbon as sort of a chemical backbone. Maybe not all life, but at least life on Earth. So moving on, let's see. Carbon, copyright, DNA, proteins. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that gets into life on Earth, which is DNA being the providing the genetic material and information, sort of proteins. All of these things, I believe, all or most require carbon structures. Anyway, moving on. So the next slide I have talks about the 6 elements. There are 6 basic chemical elements. They don't have to be in their I forget what the word is, but they're independent form. They can be part of compounds, but they're necessary for known life. I don't know if it's worth a slide, but I'll throw it up quickly since I'm getting better at this. I think I just jinxed myself. Yeah, I did. And now I can't get it to go up. What is up with that? Okay, this time it worked. Let's see, I'm reading from the text. The average pressure on the surface of Mars is about 6 millibars. So places on Mars below the average pressure elevation can have liquid water. Yeah, I mean, I remember reading that, Patio, but from what I read, if liquid water does exist on Mars, it's not thought that it can exist for any significant period of time in any quantity. And that seems to make it unlikely that it could provide sort of an abode and a medium for life there. Yeah. So anyway, hectopascal, says Fuman. I'm not really sure what that is. I assume it's some kind of an amount or fraction of pascals in pressure. But anyway, so here I used great artwork to put little ugly lines underneath the chemical symbols for the 6 elements that known life requires. It's probably not worth going into too much, but hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and others. So I'll move on from there. And I just realized that I put the sign up over my what's it called table of contents, which was a mistake. So I'm gonna have to fix that. I'm sorry. Hang on a minute. I'm gonna go find my table of contents again and put it back up, and hopefully it will work. And now it's not. And now I think it is. And I don't understand what I did differently the first time and the second time. And it's the wrong slide. Let me try this one. And that's the right slide. Yay for me. Under pressure. So then, okay, so if you look at the table of contents on the right, there's a few gold articles, titles in gold. One is Basic Organic Chemistry for Astrobiology. One is Basic Biochemistry for Astrobiology, and the next is Basic Cellular Metabolism for Astrobiology. That stuff is highly technical, but this is, I'm realizing, a very highly technical bunch. It's just fascinating, the machinery, the structures, the methods, sort of, that go on inside cells. So I took some time to write articles on the, yeah, Eclipse says, oh shucks, to write articles on these, just, to talk a little bit about the basics of these fundamental cellular systems. So I'm not gonna go into that stuff in any kind of detail, but what I will do is show a couple of slides on them. Since it's going quicker, since I'm not showing text, let me just use my horrible inventory skills to find the correct slides. Hang on a second, please. Okay, so I'm going to go to, let's see, one, and I'm going to put sign here. But it's being finicky. Why is it doing that? At the moment, for some reason, I'm having trouble getting the slide to come up. So just please give me a second while I randomly change my approach and hope for the best. So let's see. So this is a slide that I put up for the basic organic chemistry. So organic chemistry for astrobiology talks about basically carbon-containing compounds. And these are the compounds that form the chemical structures that are most important to life. I guess I won't go into detail. Let's see. Tagline. Sometimes I do, and then again, I think I don't. Sounds like confusion, which I just had. Anyway, these things, these PAH molecules, are have been found outside of Earth, and it's believed that they could be they could sort of seed. If I have it right, it's been a while since I thought about this. As the article says, could ubiquitous carbon-rich PAHs have been starter molecules for the origin of life on Earth? But more interestingly, and elsewhere in the universe, it's possible these molecules that are in outer space with carbon-containing molecules could have landed essentially on bodies outside of Earth, including Earth maybe, and could have provided the initial seed, so to speak, for these carbon-containing molecules that led to the evolution of life. So now I'm just going to move on. Biochemistry. So biochemistry is not so much the structures, but the how would you say, chemical pathways involving typically carbon-containing compounds that allow life to build its own structures, the actual physical components of cells and life, and also create energy so that life can do what it needs to do, move around and so forth. I'm going to show a slide on that one because I think it's kind of fun. And that's here. And let's see if I get lucky. And I did. So I found this pretty interesting. So when you look at biochemistry, it's very complex, and it seems sort of unapproachable in a way, but or maybe esoteric is the word. But a lot of it has to do with producing energy. And on life on Earth, glucose is the simple sugar that's used as the basic sort of currency, if you will, for energy by practically all life on Earth. It all comes down to glucose. I mean, we break things down from bacteria to your own bodies, break it down to the same sugar that's found in honey, and it's used for energy. Now, is that going to be the case for life if we find it outside of Earth? Maybe not. Maybe not. It could be some other simple sugar, like I think sucrose. It's unknown. But it's interesting that all life on Earth uses the same chemical pathway to create, or same chemical compound, molecule for energy. Anyway, let me see. As opposed to the elements being free in floating water, yes, carbon combining. Fructose is an isomer of glucose. Right. I think I remember that it could have been, or at least it's theorized that it could have been that life could have evolved on Earth to use fructose in place of glucose, but I'm not sure. Honey is both glucose and fructose. Right. Yeah, I think I didn't get into that, but honey's got a lot of glucose, so I threw it in there. All right. So anyway, going on, cellular metabolism for astrobiology. Let me throw my article up on that. That's 8.3. It does look yummy, doesn't it? I just had some of my oatmeal, in fact. Organic, too. So I found this kind of interesting. So let's see. So this is cellular metabolism, right? Yeah, oatmeal's good. So at first, this slide may look like it has nothing to do with cellular metabolism. This is the way that cells process energy and so forth. But this is as you could read, it's a photograph taken from space of Earth's atmosphere. But the point of this is to a baby. I didn't know you couldn't give honey to a baby, but anyway, my babies are older now. Earth's atmosphere is about 20% oxygen, elemental oxygen not combined with other elements. And it's fascinating to me that the main source of that oxygen is probably photosynthesis by cellular life, which is a form of cellular metabolism. So the process of cellular life early on Earth, bacteria, not plants, using the sunlight to create energy led to the byproduct of elemental oxygen being thrown into the and from each of these cells doing microscopic chemical amounts of energy ulterated 20% of the entire atmosphere of the Earth and made it oxygen. It's also interesting because if you can see, like let's say it's an egg, you could see that the atmosphere is largely oxygen, maybe from spectral lines from a great distance. You may be able to guess maybe that oxygen came from massive quantities of cellular life similar to that on Earth. So cellular metabolism, while it's done on a microscopic level, creates huge macroscopic, sometimes very visible effects in planets and atmospheres. And this is an example. Earth is an example. Let's see, tagline. I'm reading the local chat. It has been thought that originally oxygen was toxic to early organisms. Right, I remember reading that. There's a whole timeline for that, and it's really interesting. Hard to figure out exactly, but really interesting. Anyway, So moving on, I think as it turns out, oxygen can be poisonous, but once life was able to adapt to use oxygen, it's really efficient. So, so once you get that past the hump, you can use oxygen much more efficiently to support life, such as higher life, like us. Let's see, let me read this too. Um, oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere is not chemically stable in long term. The rocky planets Mars and Venus both have carbon dioxide, nitrogen atmospheres which are stable. I didn't really know that, but it kind of makes sense to me. I suspect that the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere is sort of maintained by the ongoing processes of life on Earth. And if that life were to disappear, I'm thinking maybe also with the oxygen. I mean, after all, oxygen is very chemically unstable, which is why, in a way, it's good for life. But that's another story. So moving on, let's see, it's 1:47. I've got about 13 minutes and a lot of slides, so I'll just kind of touch on things. If anyone sees particular slides that they want me to focus on with the remaining time, please let me know. I guess I'll start skipping around because there's not that much time. So the search for, in green, number 9, the search for life on solar system moons. Oxygen is, I'm reading local. Oxygen is a double-edged sword. It's highly reactive, which makes it poisonous, but also suitable for life. Yes, exactly. That's a nice way of saying what I kind of stumbled to say. But at least I know I was right. So I want to talk at least about one moon. So there's Europa, Titan, and Enceladus, if I'm pronouncing them correctly, which are all great candidates for potentially harboring life. Oxygen slowly kills, I'm reading local. Oxygen slowly kills us over time, contributing to aging. Yeah, I'll bet. Anyway, so I'm going to throw the slide for Europa up. 1A, 9A. Hang on a minute. And I'm going to cross my fingers that I'm able to slap it onto the sign. 1A, 9A. And I got lucky. Somebody said sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? So this is a cutout showing Europa. The basic gist that I wanted to put this up for is the blue stuff. That's liquid water that's believed to be, it's a model, but it's believed to be a huge liquid water ocean underneath the ice surface of Europa. And that's where I think the life might be. I'm going to go on and show another slide right away since time is getting tight. Let's see. Clostridium botulinum in honey, I'm reading local, is bad for a child. This does not this topic buzzed in SNS of Japan recently. I don't know. That's interesting. That I don't know about. I hope I never gave it to my daughters when they were young. Let's see. Let's see. So this is, I don't know what this is yet. I'm waiting for it to res. So this is, so Titan is another moon that it's thought might harbor life. It's a moon of Saturn. People don't focus on Titan too much, but I think Titan is a real good candidate. There's sort of a chemical smog that constitutes an atmosphere on Titan. This makes it pretty unique among moons. It's got a pretty significant atmosphere, which may interact with what are believed to be hydrocarbon lakes. So these are not water lakes, but they're liquid hydrocarbons like methane and ethane. And who knows if they could possibly harbor life. One speculative possibility is that liquid hydrocarbons instead of water could form the medium for life. But that's another issue. Let's see. I'm reading the local. Is this subterrestrial ocean a single shell-like entity, or is it partitioned? Let's see. Well, if we're talking about Europa, I think it's a single unpartitioned entity. With respect to Titan, the hydrocarbon lakes on Titan, if you want to call them lakes, as I understand, are in fact partitioned, and their surface too. So they come into contact with the atmosphere. See, that's an interesting thing. The liquid water on Earth comes into contact with the atmosphere, and there's a lot of chemical exchange, which could make life more likely. On other oceans, the water is covered by ice, so it doesn't have as much chemical exchange unless there's a rocky surface underneath the water, which there sometimes is. Or there could be underwater volcanoes, cryovolcanoes, which provide chemical interaction with the water. But on Titan, these liquid hydrocarbon lakes are surface lakes, it's believed, and they actually contact the atmosphere of Titan. They're not water, so life would have to be really weird to exist in those lakes. But the interface with the atmosphere of the lakes makes it an interesting thing. So let me see, I'm reading this local chat. Isolation tends to promote evolution of varied species. I'd have to think about that. Titan is probably not popular because it's so bloody cold. Right. I think that's right, Eclipse. Titan is bloody cold, which is why people think it probably doesn't have life. But it does have liquid hydrocarbon lakes on its surface. I think in large part because hydrocarbons have a much lower freezing point than water. So it's a fascinating, different sort of place to look for life. If life can exist with hydrocarbons as their liquid medium instead of water, it opens up a range of possibilities of planets and planetary bodies like moons that are too cold for liquid water. But it's a big stretch. Anyway, so moving on. About 8 minutes. I don't know if I should leave time with questions, but I always have time for questions after if anybody has them. So this is another non-copyrighted nice image that I borrowed. And this has to do with the subsurface ocean on Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn. I'm not going to get into it, but it's a little too much to get into right now. But I think a lot of it has to do with these hydrothermal vents. On Earth, life sometimes develops and congregates around underwater volcanoes. There's sort of an analogy to that on some of these moons in the solar system, what are called hydrothermal vents that spew out, sometimes freezing cold, but spew out sometimes liquids and other chemicals, which can contact the subsurface water, which can make life, or the possibility of life, seem more realistic. All right, so now I'm going to move on to, what am I going to move on to? So here's where it gets more speculative, but kind of interesting to me. Life could possibly exist with, so solvent is really the word. Water provides the solvent for life. Chemicals dissolve in water and then can interact. But there's a hypothetical possibility that other chemicals could serve as a solvent for life, such as methane in the hydrocarbon lakes of, I think it's Titan. So I'm going to put up a slide on that real quick. B1. Yes, so some of this, the local chat is getting into so diversity and stuff, which is all interesting stuff. Too much for me to talk about in a little bit of time. I knew enough about it. I'm going to move on. It's taking a little too long, and I don't want to wait for it any longer. Oh, here it goes. So, this is sorry. Oh, stimulating talk. Great, thank you. Yeah. So I appreciate it from the local. So it says here these are archaebacteria. So this is a microscopic enlargement of bacteria. The thing about this is these are primitive bacteria, and some people think that methanogens, which could potentially use liquid methane as a solvent to exist in. And if that's the case, then methanogen-like bacteria could potentially exist around hydrocarbon lakes on Titan. And in fact, some of the spectral information about the chemistry on the surface and above the surface of Titan suggests sort of chemical anomalies which could indicate life metabolizing and living in these hydrocarbon lakes. But that's another issue. And we won't know unless we go there, and that'll be expensive, but I think people will eventually do it. All right, so this brings me to the last two sections of my sort of library here, which I don't go into too much detail on. One, largely because there's not that much information available just from my background and from web searching. So there's only so much information I could gather on this, but I find it fascinating. This is my favorite slide of the whole show, just partially because I like this movie and I love Jodie Foster. So in addition to searching for microbial life beyond Earth, let's see, it's possible, and I think it's not nearly as radical as a lot of people think. It's possible that radio signals from planets, from intelligent life, sending radio signals from planets or other bodies beyond the solar system, traveling tens, even hundreds of light years, could reach Earth and could be obtained. We could see the pattern in it, realize that it's an intelligent signal and not just a random signal, and it could be decoded. That was the basis for the movie, what was it, From Contact in 1997 with Jodie Foster. This is the moment. Yeah, it was good. I didn't like the last maybe half of it. It got a little weird, but I loved the first part. This is when Jodie Foster hears and recognizes that what she's listening to is probably not just random noise, but a radio signal from an extraterrestrial intelligent race. I'm reading local Baragon. It's possible human races are early steps of speciation. Yeah, that'll get a little too much for me. But anyway, the book had a much better ending. That I didn't know. That's interesting. Let's see. It's going a little too fast, so I can't read all the local. But I was Jodie Foster's tour guide when she visited. Oh, how interesting. Very interesting. Light signals might be able to traverse a wormhole without being killed. Here's the thing. I didn't know this about radio signals are basically light, type of light. But there's nothing, they don't degrade over time. You can send a radio signal, and unless it gets interfered with, it'll go hundreds, thousands of light years and remain with the signal on it. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's possible that that signals could be sent by radio transmission from distant bodies. So let me throw up another slide. Met Jodie Foster. That is impressive. This is a picture of the radio telescope array used to pick up these signals. But I'm going to move on because I'm running out of time. And this slide is giving me some agita. Hold on a sec while I play around with it. Why is it not letting me do it? Sometimes I loathe computers. And sometimes I like them. My time's almost up, but this is some pretty interesting stuff. So, so this has to do with, so I don't have time to get into the detail, and I don't know enough about this to really do it justice, but it turns out that when people look for radio signals that could be sent by extraterrestrial intelligent beings from another star system, they look in certain places on the spectrum and they make guesses. One guess is what's called sometimes the cosmic waterhole. It has to do with a certain place on the spectrum related to, I think, water. And it's where people look because it's an obvious place to look, sort of. If somebody were to send it, maybe they would send it on this frequency band. And if somebody were to look, maybe they'd guess to look for it there. So you try to find places on the spectrum where other intelligent beings might send Earth. It's sort of a mutual guessing game. That was sort of the purpose of that. So let's see. I'm just about out of time, so maybe I'll stop there. I wanted to show one more, though, real quick. Yeah, that's about it. I don't really have time to go much further, so that's it. It's about an hour, and I don't want to go on, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to talk and answer chat. Or, well, I mean, I could show another couple of slides, or if anybody has questions. Anyway, hey, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's basically it. The rest of the slides just talk about the possibility of exoplanets basically having life. So thank you, Patio. Thank you, Violet. Thank you for forgiving any mispronunciations during my presentation or of your names as well. And I really appreciate everybody coming and spending your time here with me. Yeah, food for thought. Thanks, Chantal. Thanks, Day. Let's see. Eclipse has a comment. Sure. Very welcome. Thanks. You're welcome, Taliver. I wanted to get back to your point about exoplanets being so far away that we won't easily detect liquid water on them. Yeah, Eclipse, go ahead. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it just stands to reason that it's going to be harder to detect, but I'm not so certain about all that. Well, while that is a very good point, it is still possible to detect their atmospheres in absorption lines from spectra taking in front of the star. That sounds good to me. I mean, who knows? Maybe exoplanets will turn out to be the place where life is found, as opposed to moons in the solar system. Such absorption lines can constrain atmospheric conditions and chemical content, providing estimates of the probability of liquid. Sounds good to me. Look for signs of pollution. Yeah, pollution, or even, I'm thinking, Baragon, even just chemical changes. I mean, intelligent life might have pollution, right? But I mean, look at the atmosphere of Earth. The oxygen came from the life. So I'll bet that maybe on other planets, if there was intelligent life, they could see our planet. They could maybe detect the oxygen in the atmosphere and say, hey, wait a minute, why is there oxygen in this atmosphere? Maybe there's creatures creating the oxygen from their metabolism, and they'd be right. So who knows? Maybe it'll be exoplanets that turn out to be where life is found. Maybe life is only exists on planets. Maybe it doesn't exist in oceans. I mean, in moons. Who knows? I high carbon, the possibility of it's not so crazy as say like silicon-based life, which is also possible, but life in hydrocarbon liquids doesn't seem so far-fetched to me, and hydrocarbon liquids can be liquid at much lower temperatures generally than water. Carl Sagan proposed just such an experiment with the planet Earth and the spacecraft Galileo. I'm not sure what type of experiment, Eclipse. Maybe to detect the composition of the atmosphere and make speculations about life having contributed to the composition. I'm guessing to see if we detect life on Earth. Detect life on Earth? How though? By detecting, yeah, but by detecting or determining chemical composition elements of the atmosphere, or like by seeing cities. Let's see. I'm gonna read. I'm trying to put up another slide, but it's not working. Um, could ETs detect life on Earth by observing atmosphere? The answer is yes. Right. That in fact was the question that I asked, and right. It seemed like the answer might be yes, and you're saying just that. I'm throwing up another slide, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Oh, this is just an example of tidal forces. So this is not, yeah, that's it, right. I like the slide. Tidal forces are interesting. Um, I'm not sure I put it quite where I did there. I'd have to read my article again. Right, that's about it. So I guess that's all I have, but I'm going to stick around a little bit if anybody has questions, or if anybody, I guess in a few minutes, maybe I'll go back to the astrobiology exhibit and hang around there in case anybody wants to take a look at some of the articles. China and ESA, European Space, I guess, are talking to set up a moon base. That's interesting. I just don't think the moon is going to get us anywhere in terms of finding life. Maybe I'm wrong, but to me, it just seems like mostly just a cold, dry rock. Day says, my theory is that extraterrestrial life may be paidomorphic. Most fossil organisms, as they evolve, trend toward juvenile features in adults. If life progressed beyond humans in any other planet, they would have big heads and diminutive limbs like our babies. That would be so interesting. I'd have to really think about the logic, and it seems very speculative, but it'd be cool. Think of pictures of little green men. Yeah, like my little green SL guy. Violet, you're very welcome. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. Have a good day, a good Saturday. I don't know, maybe unless anybody wants to chat in local. Well, let me read some more. Baragon, that idea has been invoked to explain why gray aliens look like human fetuses. Oh, so in other words, that's yeah. Who knows? I mean, I want to know. It's also thought that humans are like fetal primates. I mean, yeah, I mean, I understand, the fetuses of different animals look awful similar until later development. So I guess that's part of the point from earlier. I mean, but that's in the early stage of their development. I mean, so I don't know, maybe alien fetuses look like human fetuses, right? But maybe the aliens, when they're adults, look very different. What do I know? It's also thought that humans are blah, 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 fetal forms that become sexually mature. Yeah. Man, you got me. I personally think that it's likely that intelligent life exists throughout the universe, and it's just as life goes on to its later stages of evolution, or I should say complexity, it does seem that the conditions that are required for it to evolve become narrower and narrower. So therefore, it makes sense to me that very basic microbial life could exist in many places, but only a narrow subset of those places are going to have the narrow set of conditions necessary for higher life to evolve. Then there's the issue of how common is it that higher life evolves. I find it hard to believe that whatever random circumstances led to the evolution on life on Earth, if the conditions are right and there's enough time, it's going to happen elsewhere. I just think that the conditions might be narrow. Temperature, pressure, presence of elements and chemicals over time, that kind of thing. It's just a guess. Thank you, Day. Thank you very much. If I'm pronouncing your name correctly, have a good day. Or in your case, be a good day. I'm glad voice worked the whole time. That I was concerned about. Tango, you're very welcome. All right, if I guess if nobody else has questions in text, then like I said, thank you all very much for spending a chunk of your Saturday listening to me. I really appreciate it. Feel free to get in touch with me if anybody is interested in any of this stuff and wants to chat about it, or I don't know, possibly collaborate on something. Thank you very much. Thanks, Tango. I'm gonna TP back to my new Babbage exhibit. Oh, let me see. There's another question, Cosmo. And there is the question of whether intelligence is or is not a long-term survival asset. Well, if by long-term you mean like over the course of centuries and all, maybe that sort of conflates with the question of whether intelligent life is self-destructive ultimately. I mean, maybe in a couple hundred years we'll all be gone because we wind up in wars, or because we eat up the resources and it's irreversible and we can't live here anymore. I don't know. It's possible. It would help explain what, right, the Fermi paradox. Maybe intelligent life comes into existence and then eats itself up, and in a short period of time it's gone and it's harder to find. A little bit of intelligence can kill you. Vonnegut played with the idea that the human brain is an extravagance like a peacock's tail. That sounds like a Vonnegut idea. I mean, I don't know. Who knows, right? But I mean, intelligence seems useful. But it is possible that intelligent life just sort of naturally gets ahead of itself, uses up too many resources because it can, because it's smart, and then winds up killing its own future. I hope not. Yeah, dinosaurs lasted tens of millions of years, and they didn't have that brain liability, huh? Maybe. I mean, they certainly didn't. They weren't so successful by being so smart that they could sort of eat up the resources like we are and throw things off. Dumb as stumps. Um, yeah. Yeah, the police have a song on the dinosaurs, right? 50 million years ago, they walked upon a planet so Lord of all that they could see, just a little bit like me, walking in your footsteps. But if we're walking in their footsteps, then we have a number more million years to go. We'll see about that one.